Welcome back to Veil of Epochs, the only channel where we proudly bring you survival tips from a time when the greatest threat to your life wasn't a dragon. It was breakfast. Yes. Today we're diving headfirst, ideally not into a medieval well, into the noble art of not dying horribly in the Middle Ages. A time when medicine involved leeches, dentistry involved pliers, and public health meant hoping the rats died before you did. So if you've ever wondered, how do I avoid plague when people think it comes from bad smells? Is this bread supposed to be green? Why is the village monk glowing in the dark? Then you're in the right place. Strap on your plague mask. Say goodbye to personal hygiene. And get ready for the ultimate guide to surviving an era where everything, literally everything, could kill you, including monks. Especially monks. This is how not to die in the Middle Ages. Congratulations, brave soul. You've just been hurled through the annals of time, violently ejected from the 21st century, with its antibiotics, running water, and moderately clean sushi, and dropped straight into the glorious, mud-crusted, disease-ridden lap of 14th century Europe. You wake up coughing. Not because you're sick, yet, but because the air is thick with wood smoke, open sewage, burning animal fat, and the unmistakable aroma of horse. And not the good part of the horse. Your first thought is, did I time travel? Or did someone drop me into the inside of a compost bin wearing a wig? The answer is both. You're in a village, or what passes for one. A cluster of half-rotting wooden huts arranged haphazardly around a brown, soupy puddle that everyone lovingly calls a well. That well, by the way, is located exactly 3 steps from the communal dung heap, which is located directly beneath the window of the local inn, where residents throw out their nightly bodily leftovers with the grace and accuracy of a blindfolded jester. And just as you're adjusting to the delightful ambience of fermented humanity, a nearby woman, wearing a dress that hasn't seen water since the last crusade, throws open her window and shouts, "Gardiloo!" You don't know what that means until you look up, and are promptly baptized in a warm, suspiciously yellow downpour. Welcome to the Middle Ages. Hope you brought a second shirt. Let's talk basic survival. You're barefoot, because shoes are for people with land and money. You're itchy, because everything is infested with fleas. And you're starving, because the only food you've seen so far is a loaf of what looks like bark and a questionable stew with too many eyeball-like textures. A man nearby offers you something he calls a meat pie. It twitches. You decline. You approach the town square hoping to find something helpful. Instead, you find a man in a sackcloth tunic screaming about Judgment Day and slapping himself with a dead fish. A priest furiously condemning someone's pig for heresy. And a barber surgeon performing dental surgery with a mallet and what might be a repurposed spoon. You try to ask where you are, but no one understands you, because you're speaking modern English, and they're speaking Middle English, which sounds like someone gargling Latin while choking on a potato. You pantomime water. They hand you ale. You pantomime bath. They hand you more ale. You pantomime doctor. They hand you a leech. It's fine. This is fine. Let's assess your stats. Cleanliness, -10, there's a tick in your ear and you're 3% horse poop. Immunity, non-existent. You haven't even met the plague yet and it's already RSVP'd. Social status, somewhere between village idiot and freshly exiled witch. Mental health, rapidly deteriorating. You just saw someone milk a rat. You're questioning everything. Survival odds, statistically speaking. You're about to be buried with a wooden spoon and forgotten by Wednesday. And don't even think about seeking help from the authorities. The local noble lives in a drafty stone tower 2 hills over, surrounded by guards whose main pastime is stabbing anyone who looks at them funny, which you do, by virtue of existing. If you break the law here, say, by sneezing near a loaf of bread, you're tried in a kangaroo court of angry villagers who believe a woman with one eyebrow is a certified sorceress. If found guilty, you'll be whipped, dunked in a pond, beheaded, or all 3. depending on how bored the executioner is. The church won't help either. Unless you've got relics, or tithes, or happen to be a goose that laid an egg in the shape of a cross, in which case, congratulations. You're now a holy miracle and everyone wants to kiss you. Including the goose. Back to you. Though your body is starting to ache. That's not just the cold. That's medieval poverty sinking in. Your teeth hurt. Your boots, sorry. The wooden sleds strapped to your feet are rubbing blisters the size of grapes. You haven't eaten in 12 hours. And when someone finally hands you a bowl of something nutritious, you realize halfway through chewing it's porridge with beetles. The beetles are the protein. And let's not forget the sounds, the unending cacophony of pigs squealing, babies screaming, someone hammering iron, and at least 3 different people publicly yelling about damnation and or soup. If you were hoping for knights in shining armor, you'll be sorely disappointed. The only knight you've seen so far is riding through the village on a constipated horse, sneezing violently into his gauntlet, and scowling at everyone who doesn't bow low enough. His sword is shiny. His hygiene is not. By the time night falls, you've realized 3 things. There are no toilets, only pits, and shame. There are no pillows, just hay, and bugs. There is no peace, because someone is playing a 1-string lute in the corner and chanting what might be a love song or a death threat. You lie down in a pile of straw, wrapping your Richie cloak around your shivering frame, as the rats investigate your boots and someone outside gets publicly flogged for stealing a cabbage. You whisper to yourself, "How do I not die?" And the Middle Ages whispers back, "You don't." So, you've survived your first full day in the Middle Ages. Congratulations, a few minor burns, possible parasites, emotional trauma, but you're not dead yet. You wake up, parched. Your lips are dry. Your throat feels like sandpaper rubbed with garlic. And your breath smells like medieval regret. You need water. Seems simple enough. Right? Wrong. Because in the 14th century, water isn't something you drink, it's something you survive. You trudge to the village well, hoping for a cool, refreshing splash of H2O. What you get is a wooden bucket, a questionable green tinge, and the subtle scent of something that once lived and recently died. The water is drawn from a well that's been there since the Saxons were arguing about which pagan god was hottest. It's located right next to the dung heap, downhill from the pigsty, and upwind of the communal burial pit. Basically, the only thing filtering this water is time and denial. You eye the bucket suspiciously. A local peasant sees your hesitation and shrugs. Tastes better after you boil it, which would be helpful if you had fire, a pot, and the 3 hours it takes to boil anything over a sad pile of damp sticks. You drink anyway. Congratulations. You've just ingested a smorgasbord of medieval microbial horror. Within 12 hours, you'll be leaking from every orifice and bargaining with God using whatever dignity you have left. But maybe you're smarter. Maybe you remembered your 21st century logic and thought, I'll just drink from the river. Ah. The river, nature's answer to plumbing. And also, a running collection of rotting carcasses. Industrial runoff, aka peasant pee. Dye waste from tanneries. Old boots. And the occasional cursed skull. On your way there, a local warns, don't go downstream. That's where the monks dump their chamber pots. You smile politely. You go upstream. Then someone else warns, don't go upstream. That's where the abbey butchers pigs. You scream internally, fine. Maybe there's beer. Surprise twist, in the Middle Ages, beer is actually safer than water. That's why even toddlers were drinking small ale a week. Low alcohol brew that didn't kill you immediately. It might give you rickets, but at least not dysentery. Problem is, you're poor. and the only ale available is sold by a one-eyed woman named Marla who stirs her barrels with her elbow and claims it's blessed by Saint Armpit. You drink it anyway. Now you're drunk, slightly less thirsty, and you forgot what a toilet is. Good. You're fitting in. But let's say you're stubborn. You want clean water. You find a traveling merchant. He offers blessed spring water for a penny. You buy it, drink deeply, and wake up 2 days later in a ditch, robbed of your shoes and dignity, with a note on your chest that says, "Should have just had the beer." So here's your real medieval survival guide. Water edition: if it smells like death, don't drink it. If it smells like nothing, it's probably cursed. If it smells like beer, congrats, it's beer. Drink it. All of it. If someone offers you something labeled holy tonic, run. It's just pond water with rosemary. Oh. And remember, people in this era didn't know what germs were. They thought sickness came from bad air or an angry saint. If you got cholera, the treatment wasn't hydration. It was fasting, bleeding, and a heartfelt apology to Saint Agatha of the lower intestine. Long story short, hydration in the Middle Ages was a roulette wheel of gastrointestinal doom. Spin it, sip it, and pray your internal organs don't dissolve before the rooster crows. And if they do, don't worry. The village priest is great at last rites. He does 10 a day. You're hungry. Not I could go for a snack hungry. Not even it's been a long day hungry. We're talking Middle Ages hungry, the kind where you start eyeing your leather boots and think, if I boil them long enough, maybe they'll taste like beef. You've survived bad water. You've dodged dysentery. And now your stomach is staging a coup. You wander into the village square, following the smell of something hot, earthy, and vaguely edible. You find a group of peasants huddled around a bubbling cauldron. Steam rises. It smells like ash, garlic, and something else. Something that was once alive. Maybe. You ask what they're eating. One of them grins and says, "Pottage." You ask, "What's in pottage?" They shrug. Whatever didn't die recently. Or did, but not too long ago. Pottage, dear viewer, is not a dish. It's a lifestyle. A commitment to culinary chaos. It's the medieval equivalent of fridge clean-out stew, beans, barley, a turnip if you're lucky, the last bit of dried meat from 3 weeks ago, and maybe a frog if it jumped in while you weren't looking. And yes, that eye floating near the surface? No one knows what it belongs to. And no one asks. You take a bite. Congratulations. It's salty. Very salty. Why? Because salt is the only thing keeping that meat from joining the water in the will definitely kill you category. Everything is preserved in salt. Pork, salted. Fish, salted. Your hope for variety, also salted. But you're one of the lucky ones. You've got a hot bowl of something. Many didn't. Most peasants lived off bread. Not the fluffy sourdough from your hipster bakery, no. This is trench bread. Dark, dense, brick-like. A loaf that doubles as a weapon or a pillow, depending on the day. And don't expect it to be fresh. Wheat's for the rich. You're eating rye bread, often infected with ergot, a delightful little fungus that causes vomiting, hallucinations, convulsions, and, in some cases, spontaneous death. But hey, at least it's organic. Let's say you're craving some protein. You spot a stall selling fresh meat. That is, meat from an animal that died today-ish. It's covered in flies. The butcher chases them off with a rag, then offers you a haunch of something furry. Rabbit? You ask. Sure. He lies, wrapping it in moss. You cook it over a fire, hoping to kill whatever it was infected with when it died. You bite in. It's gamey, chewy, still bleeding a little. You feel something move. You scream. It might have been a rat, or a baby badger. At this point, you're too tired to care. Maybe you think, well, at least the nobility ate better. Ah yes. the nobility, the gastronomic gods of medieval cuisine, roasted peacock, stuffed swan, and pies filled with live birds, not for flavor, mind you, but for theatrics. Nothing says I own land and people like slicing open a pastry and releasing pigeons at your dinner guests. And how was that swan prepared? With spices. Exotic ones, cinnamon from Ceylon, saffron from the east, pepper, literal gold dust in peppercorn form. Imported by traders who crossed oceans and survived pirate attacks just so your local duke could sprinkle it on his flaming hedgehog pie. Meanwhile, you're eating boiled cabbage. Again, if you're really lucky. Your village celebrates a feast day, maybe Saint Mildred of overboiled turnips. The whole town gathers. You get bread, cheese, maybe some unsalted meat. You eat until you cry. Then comes the dessert, a slightly less moldy crust of bread soaked in honey, fermented berries, or a pudding made from animal fat, milk, and, if you're fancy, crushed dates. You don't ask where the dates came from. You just eat. But remember, hygiene in the kitchen didn't exist. The same hands that butchered a cow also wiped a child's nose and stirred the stew with the same spoon, which also doubled as a back scratcher. You're not sure if your stomach hurts because of the food, or because it's learning the concept of vengeance. In summary, if it's chewy, sour, and smells like wet hay, it's lunch. If it's salty enough to pickle your tongue, it's dinner. If it's moving, cook it again. Or don't. Your call. If it has feathers and it's not a bird, don't ask questions. Food in the Middle Ages wasn't just nourishment. It was a test of faith, luck, and digestive tolerance. You didn't eat to live. You ate to gamble. And every bite was a dice roll against salmonella, starvation, or surreal hallucinations courtesy of Kirstry. You wake up. Birds are chirping. The sun is shining through the cracks of your thatched roof. You stretch. Take a deep breath. And immediately regret it. The air smells like wet straw, manure, rotting fish, and someone's leftover chamber pot from 2 nights ago. But hey, that's life in the Middle Ages. You get used to it. Or, more likely, your nose gives up trying. You head outside, passing a neighbor who's tossing the contents of their nightjar directly into the street. Look out below. They shout, as warm terror splashes next to your boots. Why is everyone okay with this? Because back then, air wasn't seen as just air. It was believed to carry miasma, poisonous bad air that spread disease. But here's the kicker, miasma wasn't caused by poop in the streets or decaying meat in the alley. No. The true culprit was your moral failing. Yes. If you got sick, it was probably because you were sinful, or poor, or you dared to walk past a noble and breathe in their superior oxygen. Let's say you're in town and you spot a noble coming. Do you A. Greet them politely, B. Cross the street and pretend to admire a haystack, C. Hold your breath and pray they don't accuse you of contaminating the air with your commoner lungs? Answer, D. All of the above. You see, nobles believed their bodies were purer, physically, spiritually, and, apparently, atmospherically. Their clothing was scented with herbs, their rooms filled with flowers and perfume, and their beds lined with sachets of lavender and mint, not for comfort, but to purify the air around them. Meanwhile, your room smells like goat, because your roommate is a goat. Doctors, or more accurately, the medieval version of someone with a hat and a knife, wore long bird-like masks stuffed with spices. They weren't trying to be spooky, they truly believed these herbs filtered out bad air. So if you saw a guy in a plague doctor mask walking toward you, congratulations, it was either your last day alive or your last chance to get bled out and given leeches. Now let's talk cities. Crowded, filthy, and fragrant in all the worst ways. People bathed maybe once a year, wore the same clothes for weeks, and shared their sleeping quarters with animals. That's not an exaggeration. Pigs, chickens. And fleas were regular bedfellows. Fresh air? It was for nobles lounging in their herb gardens or taking perfumed walks through the palace. You were lucky if the wind changed direction before the butcher tossed pig guts into the alley again. And if you were really unlucky, you lived downwind of a tannery, where animal hides were soaked in urine, feces, and lime. The smell could knock out a horse, or at least cause it to rethink its career choices. Still, the worst was yet to come. The breath of the upper class. Rich nobles ate a steady diet of meat, onions, garlic, and wine. Their teeth were rarely cleaned. And toothpaste wasn't invented, unless you count powdered bone or burnt rosemary ash. If you ever had the misfortune of being within 6 inches of a baron's morning breath, you'd understand why knights wore armor, to block the smell. So yes, breathing near a noble could actually be hazardous to your health. Either because you might get arrested for rare theft, or because they'd cough nobly in your face while describing how peasants cause plague. Fun fact, some towns even passed laws forbidding the poor from walking too close to the homes of the rich. Why? To prevent the air from being tainted. Yes. The idea was that your existence was polluting. You were the human equivalent of smog. But historical records suggest the nobility weren't exactly a bouquet of roses either. They just had the money to mask it with perfume imported from the east at the price of a small village. Ironically, the plague didn't care. It took nobles and peasants alike. The Black Death rolled in like a perfume-immune bulldozer. And suddenly, breathing became a much more democratic hazard. In short, if you lived near a sewer, you were doomed. If you breathed near a noble, you were doomed. If you sneezed in church, burn the heretic, he's releasing airborne sin. If you farted in public, you might be exiled. Unless you were the king. Then it was considered divine thunder. Air wasn't just invisible in the Middle Ages, it was weaponized. And unless you were rich, pious, or extremely lucky, it was only a matter of time before the air you breathed judged you for existing. You're not feeling well. Your head aches. Your nose runs. And you've been coughing for 3 days. In 2025, you'd take a COVID test, grab some ibuprofen, drink tea, and rest. In the Middle Ages, step 1, panic. Because back then, even a sneeze could mean 3 things. You're cursed, you've angered God, or worse, you've got the Black Death. Your family gathers around you with the solemnity of a funeral choir. Call the physician. Someone shouts. Bad news, a physician in this era is just a guy who owns a robe, some leeches, and a book he can't actually read. He shows up, probably on horseback, trailing herbs and self-confidence. He checks your pulse, then does the most advanced medical procedure of the time, sniffing your pee. He holds up the flask like it's vintage wine. He swirls it. He squints at the color. Ah yes. He says, the urine is too yellow. You ask, what does that mean? He answers, too much yellow bile. We must balance your humors. Now, let's pause for a second. Humorism was the grand theory of medicine for nearly 2.000 years. It said your body was governed by 4 liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. If you were sick, that meant one of them was out of balance. The solution? Remove it from your body. So if you had a fever, too much blood, cold, too much phlegm, stomach pain, probably demons. Or cheese. But mostly demons. Your medieval doctor would say, let us bleed you. Bleeding was the medieval equivalent of have you tried turning it off and on again? No matter the ailment. Out came the knives. Or leeches. Or both. You lie back while he opens a vein. You're dizzy, weak, and definitely not better. But he nods with pride. Excellent. We're making progress. Still not improving? Let's try cupping, lighting fire in a glass, placing it on your skin, and watching as it raises terrifying purple blisters. Supposedly, this draws out illness. In reality, It just draws out screams or maybe trepanation, drilling a hole in your skull to let the bad spirits escape. Side effects include death. Almost exclusively death. But maybe your doctor isn't that fancy. Maybe you live in a village. And your healer is the local wise woman. She's gentle, kind, and actually knows which herbs might help your fever. But because she owns a black cat and talks to plants, the church suspects she's a witch. So now you're sick and your doctor's on trial. What if you go to a monastery hospital? Great. Except, it's not a hospital. It's more like a hotel for the dying. The monks will pray for you, wash your feet, and then lay you down in a bed beside other very contagious people. There are no antibiotics, no anesthesia, no sterile gloves. Surgery is performed with knives that just sliced bacon. Surgeons were often barbers, yes. The guy who cut your hair also removed your appendix. And maybe your spleen. By accident. Let's say you get a wound, maybe a cut from a rusty farming tool. It becomes infected. You limp to the barber surgeon. He looks at it and says, it must be cleansed by fire. Yes. Cauterization, basically branding your flesh shut. He heats a rod till it's white hot and presses it to the wound. You scream. Everyone says, ah. Good. It's working. Still alive? Then it's time for your final option, pilgrimage. Walk 500 miles to a distant church. Crawl on your knees. Light a candle. And pray to Saint Jude, Saint Sebastian, or Saint Theobald of Abscesses. If that doesn't work, you must have lacked faith. Or worse, you made eye contact with a toad during a full moon. That's on you. And of course, there's always plague medicine. If you caught the Black Death, your treatment included cutting a pigeon in half and placing it on your armpit, drinking a potion made from ground emeralds, rubbing onions, garlic, or even dried human dung into your boils. Yes, that was real. Spoiler, none of this worked, so you died. But at least your humors were balanced, probably. So, you've survived bad bread, rogue surgeons, and your cousin being treated with a flaming pigeon. Congratulations. But don't celebrate yet. In the Middle Ages, God had beef with you personally. And he had an entire arsenal of creative ways to prove it. Floods, famines, fires, earthquakes, and of course, hailstones the size of turnips. To people back then, these weren't natural disasters. These were divine Yelp reviews. And you were getting 0 stars. Let's start with a classic, famine. It's 1315. Crops have failed 3 years in a row. Why? Because it's been raining non-stop since forever. Fields are flooded. Your wheat's underwater. Your pigs have trench foot. There's no food. And no Uber Eats. You start by eating the seed grain. Then the animals. Then the dogs. And then rumors start. The baker's son hasn't been seen in a while. People start digging up graves. No joke. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 led to stories of cannibalism, even in monasteries. Meanwhile, bishops tell you, this is because of your sins. Maybe stop dancing on Sundays. Then there's plagues of locusts. Your one remaining cabbage, gone. Your onions, devoured mid-scream. Even the rats are annoyed. You know it's bad when rats are packing up and leaving. Next up, fire. The thatched roofs of medieval homes made sure that one drop torch could turn your whole village into a campfire. And guess what? Fire insurance wasn't invented yet. Neither was a fire department. Or, you know, buckets. You just stood there watching the flames with your neighbors like, well, that's that. But wait, there's more. Ever heard of St. Elmo's fire? It's this creepy blue glow that sometimes appears on metal during storms. Back then, they thought it was ghosts. Or worse, omens. Your weather forecast was, Monday, God is mildly irritated. Tuesday, lightning smites a cow. Wednesday, you are the cow. Speaking of lightning, churches were often the tallest buildings. So they got struck a lot. Worshippers would be deep in prayer when suddenly the steeple exploded. You'd think this might make them question things. But no. They just added more bells. Because, obviously, God loves bells. Oh. And if you're standing near the bell when lightning strikes, the metal rings through you. Boom. Now you're deaf. Possibly on fire. And still expected to tithe. And let's not forget earthquakes. When the ground shakes. People don't think tectonic plates. They think, who angered God this time? Spoiler, probably women. Or cats. Or women who owned cats, even where they had morality. A good harvest? God's happy. Hailstorm destroys your vineyard? That's on you for lusting after your cousin's wife that one time during Lent. The most terrifying of all, the dance plague of 1518. Yes. This happened. In Strasbourg. People started dancing uncontrollably, in the streets, for days. Some collapsed. Some died. Why? Doctors said, it's hot blood and musical imbalance. Clergy said, demons. Modern historians say, probably mass hysteria. But one thing is clear, in the Middle Ages, even dancing could kill you. And if it wasn't fire or famine or frogs, it was random bad luck. A falling branch. A well that collapsed. A beehive hurled from a castle wall. You laugh, but that happened. More than once. Then came the ultimate punishment, excommunication. Now you're not just dying. You're dying outside the grace of God. That meant no funeral. No burial in sacred ground. Just your rotting corpse tossed into a ditch. Next to that guy who stole a chicken in 1284. Honestly. Death was so common and chaotic that entire towns ran out of grave space. So they dug up old bones. Stacked them in ossuaries. And made art out of them. You thought Pinterest was dark? Medievals invented bone decor. They'd walk through a chapel made entirely of skulls and femurs and say, ah, tasteful. Let's be honest. Everyone wants to be fashionable. But in the Middle Ages, fashion was like a sword, stylish, shiny, and ready to stab you in the lungs. Let's begin at the bottom. Shoes. Forget your Air Jordans. Medieval nobles wore polanes, which were shoes with tips so long they needed to be tied to your knees. Some were over 2 feet long. That's not a shoe, that's a weaponized toe. Imagine trying to run from a fire with curled clown shoes dragging behind you. Spoiler, you didn't run. You tripped. Flailed like a flounder. And died fabulously. There was even a shoe code, the longer the toe, the higher your status. But imagine being a peasant watching a duke trying to climb stairs in foot noodles. You'd die, of laughter. Then came corsets, or as medieval women might call them, the daily rib crusher. While true corsets evolved more in later centuries. Even in the medieval period, tightly bound bodices and stiff garments forced the female torso into something resembling a wine bottle. Bones were literally moved. Lungs were compressed. One wrong sneeze, and it's rib shrapnel. And let's not forget the headdresses. Ah yes, the hennin. A tall, conical hat worn by noble women. Elegant? Maybe. Practical? Absolutely not. These hats reached over 3 feet high. They were like wearing a traffic cone on your head. And then adding a flag. A gust of wind? Gone. Doorways? Not today. And God help you if it caught fire, which brings us to wigs. Wigs were made of horsehair, wool, or, if you were really classy, human hair stolen from corpses. They were soaked in oils to look shiny, which meant they were also highly flammable. People quite literally burst into flames while lighting candles. You were one romantic evening away from becoming a torch. It got so bad that kings had to ban open flames near wigs. That's right, medieval fashion was so deadly it required legislation. Even makeup was trying to murder you. Whitened skin was trendy, so people used lead-based face creams. slowly but surely. It destroyed your skin, nerves, and kidneys. If you were lucky, you just looked like a ghost. If not, you dropped dead looking like a porcelain doll melting in the sun. Then came the fur-lined cloaks, designed to show wealth and keep you warm. But where did that fur come from? Rats, weasels, and sometimes plague-infested critters. Nothing like wearing a death trap with buttons. But men didn't get off easy either. They had codpieces, which were fabric pouches placed over the crotch. The bigger, the better. What started as practical armor for sensitive zones became fashion statements the size of melons. If your codpiece could double as a lunch bag, congratulations, you were someone important. And uncomfortable. By the late medieval period, clothes had layers. So many layers. You'd wear a shirt, a tunic, a surcoat, a mantle, and sometimes armor on top. Summer, heat stroke. Winter, frostbite. There was no winning. Fashion was a battlefield. You fought for attention, for status, and against hypothermia. But no matter what you wore, the goal was clear: look good. Even if you die trying. Because in the Middle Ages, people were buried in their best clothes. And with the way things were going, you were going to need that outfit soon. So, you've made it this far, through poisoned wells, flaming wigs, and shoes you could sword fight with. But now, your stomach hurts. Maybe it was the moldy bread. Maybe it was the fish that blinked at you. Or maybe it was just Tuesday. Time to visit the doctor. But wait, what is a doctor in the Middle Ages? Well, it depends. Your options include a university-trained physician, who's never touched a patient, a barber surgeon, who cuts hair and legs, or a wise woman with a suspicious number of toads. Let's start with the physician. He arrives in a long black robe, wearing a hat so wide it could host a chess tournament. He won't touch you, that's beneath him, but he will wave a book near your face and say, "Ah yes." Clearly an imbalance of your humors. What are humors? Glad you asked. In medieval medicine, your body was filled with 4 substances: blood, cheerful; phlegm, lazy; black bile, depressed; yellow bile, angry. Your health depended on balancing these. So if you were too angry, obviously, leeches. Leeches were the multivitamin of the Middle Ages. Got a fever? Leeches. Headache? Leeches. Stubbed your toe? Get ready for bloodletting, and a bucket. Sometimes they skipped the leeches and just cut a vein. Let's be honest, doctors back then were part healer, part vampire. You leave the clinic lighter. Not in spirit, just in blood. Next, barber surgeons. Yes. The same guy who gave you a bowl cut would also amputate your leg. His tools: a saw, a leather strap, and optimism. Anesthesia? Bite this stick. Sterilization? What's that? Success rate? Let's just say if your barber had a garden, it was probably made of patient parts. But hey, if surgery failed, you could always turn to folk remedies. Feeling cursed? A nun would whip up a tonic of crushed herbs, goat's breath, and moonlight. Need birth control? Try soaking a sponge in vinegar and hoping for divine intervention. Have the plague? One recipe included crushed emeralds. Can't afford emeralds? Just wrap a pigeon in cloth, light incense, and slap it on your chest. This actually happened. One popular treatment: trepanation, drilling a hole in your skull to release evil spirits. You'd walk in with a migraine and leave with a breeze between your ears. Let's not forget urine analysis. Doctors would taste your pee to diagnose you. Slightly nutty, with hints of desperation. A whole profession was built around color-coded urine charts. Like a medieval wine tasting gone horribly wrong. Then there were saints. You could pray to Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Roch for plague, Saint Fiacre for hemorrhoids. That's right. Even in the afterlife, someone drew the short straw. But if prayers didn't work, people turned to astrology, because clearly, Your stomachache was caused by Mars being in retrograde. Doctors would chart your star signs before surgery, because if the moon was in the wrong house, your spleen would be offended. By the 14th century, flagellants walked from town to town, whipping themselves to atone for humanity's sins. Their logic: if we suffer enough, maybe God will stop killing us with rats. Meanwhile, your leg is falling off. Still, some remedies did work, like garlic for infection, honey for wounds, or not going to the doctor at all. But the true irony: sometimes, the most dangerous part of being sick in the Middle Ages was trying to get better. So you've made it this far through medieval survival, avoided drinking plague soup, managed not to burst into flames via your hairstyle, and only mildly injured your internal organs with corsets and cursed meat pies. Congratulations. But don't relax just yet, because now we enter a dangerous new territory: being rich. Yes. In the Middle Ages, being a nobleman or noblewoman came with perks, castles, silk, falcons, a personal fool, and the right to ignore the peasants. But it also came with a high likelihood of dying in ways so absurd they'd make modern influencers blush. Let's begin with one of the most misunderstood causes of death among the upper class: scent. See, bathing regularly was very suspicious to medieval nobles. Some believed it weakened the body, others thought water opened your pores to disease, and some simply didn't care. Why bathe when you can drown yourself in perfume that smelled like a monastery exploded inside a flower shop? Nobles used perfumes made from ingredients like musk, taken from a deer's backside, ambergris, whale bath, rose water infused with camphor, or in some horrifying cases, lead and arsenic. That's right. The upper class didn't just smell like poison, they wore poison. And not just on their necks. Perfumed gloves, perfumed wigs, perfumed undergarments. You could literally die from hugging a noble too enthusiastically. Death by cuddle was not out of the question. Now let's talk diet. The noble table was where dreams went to die. Lavish feasts often lasted 6 hours or more, featuring 12 courses of meat, wine flowing like a river, and a total absence of anything green. Vegetables were considered peasant food. Fiber? Never heard of her. Favorite dishes included peacock roasted and then redressed in its feathers, because nothing says I'm better than you like eating a phoenix wannabe. Pies that exploded with live birds for entertainment, and sauces so rich they could pay rent. But here's the thing: nobles rarely chewed. Chewing was for commoners. Real nobles swallowed large chunks of food whole, like snakes with table manners. Several monarchs choked to death mid-feast. Truly, the food was to die for, literally. Moving on to fashion, a delightful game of how much pain can I endure while looking fabulous. Noblemen wore doublets stuffed with sawdust and cod pieces big enough to store your week's leftovers. Ladies? Oh, they suffered for fashion on an Olympic level. Corsets tight enough to rearrange organs. Headpieces so tall they needed architectural blueprints. Dresses so wide they required spatial awareness training just to enter a room. And underneath all that, fleas, lice, and enough sweat to water a small farm. One French duchess famously collapsed during a feast, not from illness, but because her gown weighed over 30 pounds. She was literally crushed by her own elegance. Now let's address medicine. You'd think nobles had access to the best medical care, and you'd be wrong. Rich patients were often given exotic treatments, which basically meant more expensive and more lethal. Cures involved crushed emeralds, yes. They ate gemstones, ground mummy powder imported from Egypt, mercury mixed with wine, because nothing says cure like slow poisoning, or burning hedgehog spines and inhaling the smoke to relieve coughing. And unlike the poor, they could afford more leeches. Double the leeches, double the anemia. Oh, and their doctors? They consulted astrology more than symptoms. Your spleen hurts? That's because Jupiter is angry. try wearing more blue. Their urine was analyzed, sniffed, sometimes tasted, by highly paid professionals who wrote dissertations on what pee smelled like during a lunar eclipse. Let's also consider entertainment. Quaint evenings included live performances from jesters whose job security depended on their jokes not getting anyone decapitated. Some even wore bells on their heads to distract from political commentary. Juggling was encouraged. Political satire? Proceed with caution. There were falconry sessions, where a noble might spend hours bonding with a bird that absolutely hated them. If birds weren't dramatic enough, you could host a private joust. What's more fun than watching two armored men with head injuries try to skewer each other for your amusement? Boredom often led to extremely bad ideas. Case in point, nobleman wakes up one day and says, "You know what sounds fun? A crusade." And off they'd go, dragging entire armies to foreign lands under the noble pretense of holiness, but really just bored and power hungry. Even furniture was hazardous. Beds were massive status symbols, with intricate carvings, tall curtains, and often several other people sleeping in them. You didn't sleep alone. Servants, guards, dogs, and sometimes clergy joined the slumber party. Nothing says royalty like a medieval cuddle pile. And yet, the mattresses were stuffed with straw, feathers, and tiny creatures no one talked about. Itchy luxury. But luxury nonetheless. Let's not forget the death process. Dying as a noble meant pageantry. You'd be embalmed in honey, dressed in your finest robes, placed in a golden coffin, and paraded through town while people threw flowers and wondered who'd inherit your collection of falcon bones. Sometimes, nobles were buried with items for the afterlife: swords, coins, religious icons, and on rare, but real, occasions, living servants. You're coming with me, Pierre. In the end, nobility in the Middle Ages wasn't just dangerous. It was a masterclass in how to die dramatically. You weren't just poisoned, you were poisoned by your own skincare. You didn't just get sick, you paid to be treated with crushed rubies and incense. You didn't just choke, you choked on the swan you were showing off to your guests. But don't worry. Even in death, your legacy lives on, in the form of fashion museums, confusing family crests, and the lingering smell of ambergris on your 600-year-old pillowcase. So next time you envy the rich and powerful of the Middle Ages, just remember, sometimes, the more silk you wear, the faster you sink. Congratulations. You've made it through contaminated wells, airborne monks, haunted corsets, demonic bread, and the joyless luxury of being nobility. By all accounts, you should be dead. But you're not. Somehow, you, brave, foolish, plague-resistant viewer, have survived the Middle Ages. Or have you? Because now we arrive at the final, most unpredictable cause of medieval death: everything else. Let's be perfectly clear, the Middle Ages didn't care about your efforts. You could avoid all known dangers, follow every absurd superstition, wear 3 garlic necklaces, and still die because a cow fell off a roof. Yes, that actually happened. More than once. See, life back then wasn't so much about living as it was about not dying creatively. And the longer you lived, the weirder your demise was statistically likely to be. Dying of old age? Rare. Dying because someone dropped a chamber pot from a 3rd-story window while you were singing Gregorian chants? Likely. Let's start with the weather. The weather in medieval Europe was not okay. In one moment, it was sunny enough to get sunstroke in wool armor, and in the next, biblical floods wash away your entire goat herd. Lightning strikes were considered divine punishment. People wore religious relics around their necks hoping God would aim elsewhere. Didn't always work, especially for bell ringers. Many church tower bell ringers were electrocuted during storms, because, and I kid you not, they kept ringing the bell to scare off the thunder. That'll do it. Next, alchemists. You might think, hey, They were early scientists. Incorrect. They were slightly curious pyromaniacs with access to mercury and zero supervision. Want to die in a burst of green flame? Trust an alchemist. These were people who truly believed they could turn urine into gold. They wore robes, spoke in cryptic Latin, and regularly exploded their workspaces. It wasn't science, it was wizardry with a 60% mortality rate. Still, nobles kept hiring them. Because who wouldn't want gold from pee? Until, of course, the alchemist tried to purify your humors with a drink made of molten silver. And then it was funeral time. Again. And what about architecture? Medieval buildings weren't designed with safety in mind. Floors tilted. Staircases randomly disappeared. Ceilings leaked, moaned, and occasionally collapsed. The average home was a dark, smoky box with one window, a dirt floor, and a ceiling so low even gnomes complained. Falling from windows was not uncommon, and neither was being pushed. Political assassinations were often disguised as oops. He fell into the mud during prayer hour. Very pious. Let's not forget booby traps, because yes, those existed too. Nobles paranoid about poison would rig their doors with spikes or design labyrinthine passageways where only they knew the route to the toilet. Unfortunately, even they forgot the directions. Many a lord was found days later, starved and confused, 10 feet from his bed. Want to talk about wild animals? Wolves roamed freely. Bears showed up to parties. And boars were treated like boss battles. Rich people kept pet leopards. Why? Because it made them look powerful. Did they survive the leopards? Rarely. But they looked great doing it. And then there's the Holy Church, protectors of the soul, savers of the damned, and accidental executioners of quite a few people who sneezed suspiciously. Yes, folks, blasphemy was a health hazard. Say the wrong thing at the wrong time, like questioning whether saints really bled wine, and you might wake up tied to a stake, listening to sermons and the smell of roasting heretic. All before breakfast. Even entertainment could kill you. Jugglers dropped knives. Sword fights went too far. People died from laughter, or from jokes that landed too close to royal insecurity. What do you call a king with no crown? Answer, dead. Don't forget love. Falling in love could be fatal, especially if the person you loved was already married to a knight with anger issues and a spiked mace collection. Forbidden romances led to duels, exile, or being thrown into a convent with aggressive geese and no wine. And finally, the worst medieval enemy of all, your own body. Everything inside you was considered suspect. Sneezing too hard could rupture a vessel and kill you. Dreams were seen as potential demonic invasions. Having a mole in the wrong place? Clearly a witch's teat. Best case scenario, exorcism. Worst case, trial by water. Which, spoilers, you weren't going to win. So, what have we learned? The Middle Ages didn't want you to die. It needed you to. It was an era powered by confusion, bacteria, religious terror, animal-related injuries, and deep, committed ignorance. It wasn't trying to be cruel, it just genuinely thought bathing might kill you but drinking mercury could help. And yet, people lived. They farmed. They fell in love. They invented weird musical instruments. They built cathedrals so tall they scraped the sky. And they wrote poems about farts. They survived. Not because they were wise, but because sheer stubbornness is humanity's best survival trait. So here's your final Middle Ages survival tip. Don't try to be clever. Don't try to be rich. Don't try to be fashionable. Just be slightly below average. Fly under the radar. Smile at your baron. Avoid bread that glows in the dark. And if a monk asks if you want to help summon angels with fermented honey, say no. And if you make it to old age, congratulations. You're either a wizard or lying.